All I'm saying with understanding sex as a spectrum as opposed to a binary is that there's not two kinds, like male and female are not two different kinds of thing. What we usually call male and female are typical clusters of the distribution of different kinds of biology. We know that some people don't fit into these typical clusters. It doesn't make them not human or not male or female or not right or what have you. Understand that these things exist on a spectrum, not as two different kinds. Men are not from Mars, women are not from Venus. We're both the same species, from the same planet. Our bodies are a lot more similar than they are different, and there's a lot of bodies that don't fit cleanly into those two categories.
You've arrived at the Mental Health Spotlight podcast with therapist Kais. How's your morning real quick? Thank you for meeting me.
Good. I was on a meeting in Malaysia virtually earlier, so I've been virtually traveling.
Oh my gosh, where are you right now?
I'm in Princeton. So yeah.
Oh, you're in Princeton?
Yeah.
Because if you were in Malaysia, I was going to say, oh, this should be interesting.
Yeah. No. I would rather be in Malaysia right now, but that's not the case.
Yes. The answer is yes. We can do that. Agustín Fuentes. Did I say it right?
Yes, you did.
I've known you how long, and I'm not sure I'm going to say your name correctly. That's terrifying. A little terrifying, but I got it. So you and I were chatting, and then I realized you wrote this amazing book that got me very excited. I think we talked about it before it even happened. And it's called Sex is a Spectrum, The Biological Limits of the Binary. Oh, I got it all. I have the book. Of course, it's not sitting in front of me, but it never fits on the screen. So I'll put a lot of screenshots of it in the final. Before we even talk about the book, because I think the book probably speaks a lot to who you are. Tell me a little bit about who you are. Why are you writing this book, and who are you as a person in this world?
Well, so I think to frame it like why me, right? Why this book is I've spent the last, 30 years or so basically doing research into human bodies, human lives, humans in the deep past, humans in the present, other primates, right? Humans are primates, have what were the monkeys and apes and things like that. So what I really spent the last 30 years doing is looking at the big picture and the small details of what makes us tick, right? What does it mean to be human? What does it mean biologically? What does it mean culturally? What does it mean historically? And really over the last decade or maybe decade and a half, I've seen that there's so much knowledge, so much information, right? In this sort of research areas and on the universities and all that. But very little of that is getting outside to people, right? It's not people. And so we're having discussions around really complicated topics like gender and sex. And people are jumping in without a baseline understanding. And so who am I? I'm someone who's spent most of my adult life studying people and like how we work and why we work the way we do. And I think taking that information and getting it a little bit more broadly distributed is a good idea.
And you kind of leaned into one of my later questions is, where does science chime in? Like, we need science to inform us. And so it sounds like you said, I'm a scientist, you're an anthropologist, correct, by training?
Yeah, so I'm a biologist. Actually, I'm trained as a zoologist and an anthropologist. So I work a lot with humans as an anthropologist, but I also work with a lot of other kinds of primates, monkeys and apes. And I've done research on birds and small mammals and things like that too. And
now you are in residence at Princeton. Do I say that correctly? Like you're a big shot over there.
I don't know if I'm a big shot, but I am a professor at Princeton. And so another big thing that I do is I teach a lot, right? And one of the best things I love, I work with really advanced researchers, postdoctoral scholars, graduate students, all that, but working with undergraduates, because at an intro level, when you're talking with, 18, 19, 20-year-olds in a classroom, they push you, right? Because they're like, why? What's going on? And they're so ready to just sort of learn and to think and to challenge and to critique and to engage. And that keeps you going, right? So imagine if you're someone, no matter what your job is and what you do, and every day or most days of your job, you got a bunch of people raising their hands and saying, but wait, why? What's going on? It pushes you to do a better job. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and I love it. I love that a lot of my clients are in that younger age because they can stimulate me. They're like my muses. So you constantly get fresh ideas and and probably like a fresh perspective on things from being around your students too, which is fabulous.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned animals, and I could tell, I don't think I knew you were a zoologist in the background, but it makes sense because you use so many examples of so many species across the animal kingdom. And I'm like, oh, he's going deep here. He knows a lot about things and primates probably primarily, but
Yeah, I think, and what's
That's
really
helpful.
important is in talking about humans, the reason we talk about other primates or other animals, right, other life on the planet, is because the comparative approach, like understanding what's distinctive about humans, like what's really
Yeah.
human, you have to understand what is out there in the world, right? So a lot of these things,
Yeah.
like strong social bonds, caring for young, really having complicated social relationships, that's not distinctively human, right? We do that to a whole new level. But man,
Yes.
all the primates do that. So many social mammals do that. And so we can learn about ourselves by understanding
Mhm.
how other things in the world do the sort of day to day thing.
I love that. I feel like in my practice in mental health, we often talk about what do we need as humans? What
Right.
what are we primally set for as a human? And that will help to inform the science behind how we should behave. So I use it a little. I use a little science over here, teeny bit. So I hope I'm the least erudite of those who have interviewed you. And I hope that I'll sound sometimes like a 12-year-old, and I'm probably going to have to read my notes to use the right language. However, something I want to get out of the way early on, and you talk about it in the book, is how to define
Yeah.
certain labels. And I've gotten to the point where I no longer have to giggle when we say things like gonads,
Right.
because in our culture, and there's a point in here, we don't talk about this business.
Yeah.
We're afraid to talk about our human bodies and, God forbid, reproduction.
Yeah.
And this book says, no, we have to discuss these things and understand them. So you kind of have different ways you talk about gender, sex biology, sex in general. What are the terms we might use, and could they be confusing? Because I think sex biology is one of your big ones.
Yeah. So there's a lot of confusion here. Well, let's just put it right
Yeah.
out there, right?
Let's do it.
We're going to talk about, human junk. I mean, that's, it's this weird, everyone's afraid of talking about,
Yay.
you got to talk about biology. If we were talking about locomotion, we talk about the bones in the feet, the muscles and the ligaments. We talk about the legs and the joints okay. So a couple things. When most people say sex, the word, they actually usually mean gender, which is a cultural classification. So gender is the way in which cultures expect certain bodies, behaviors, appearances, relations to be, right? So we can talk about that in a moment, but that's not
Good.
what I'm talking about most of the time, although you can't, as humans, we're always talking about gender. But when I say sex, I'm really talking about sex biology. That is everything about the reproductive biology of a body, plus all the other stuff that affects, right? So most people think sex is basically like stare between someone's legs and see what kind of genitals they have. That's not
Right.
true, right? Because that is variable. Yes, on average, right? Most people have identifiable genitals that fall into two general clusters, right? The sort of testes, penis, or clitoris, vagina, labia.
See, we said the words. I'm so excited.
We got it. No, we got to say, I mean, first of all,
I love it.
like,
Please.
hand or manus is what we say, penis. I mean, clitoris. I mean, those are things that if you can't talk about this, then we can't have the conversation. And I think that's in our society. People get so uptight about talking about genitals, and that's part of the problem.
But, amen. Like if I'm out with my friends, and God forbid, as a female with my female friends, I mention vagina, and everyone looks around like, Kais, you can't say vagina. I'm like, why? I'm so confused. So I hope maybe we'll dispel some of the fear of our human bodies and these wonderful organs we all use and need.
Absolutely. So let's think about this. When we talk about sex biology, and we'll get to this in depth later, some people are like, okay, sperm and egg, right? That's all that matters. If your body makes sperm, you're a male. And if your body makes eggs, you're a female, period, done. We know everything we need to know. That's a lie. That is absolutely not true. There's a lot of complexity. And so when I talk about sex biology, I'm interested in what's the range? What's all the variation associated with genitals, right? With gonads, right? The things that produce a wide variety of hormones, testes or ovaries. What's up with sort of pregnancy, menstruation, lactation? What's up with body differences that are related to hormone or developmental differences? What's up with the patterns of different parts of the body that aren't influenced, right? Don't vary depending on whether you have an XX or an XY chromosome or whether you produce sperm or eggs, right? Like, for example, your heart or your liver are not sexed, right? If I plopped a liver or a heart here on the table, you couldn't tell whether it was male or female. But and here's back to gender. The lives we lead in, for example, the United States, is if you grow up a girl or a boy into a man or a woman, the way you live, the things you eat, how you treat yourself is going to affect your body. So like you really can't say that the biology, sex, and the cultural part, gender, are actually separate. always together, influencing one another. Now, that probably just confused everyone a lot, but that's okay, because starting with
We need that.
complexity or confusion is not bad, because really, you know,
Mm-mm.
all of us need to remember that time when we were 12 or 13 or 14 and we were, you know, our body was changing or things like that. And we we're like, what's going on? We need to remember
Mm-hmm.
and have that view of like, bodies are complicated. There's lots of stuff going on. Let's take some time and really have a conversation.
Curious. I feel like that's built into this. Let's be curious
Yeah.
about what's going on and not assume that what we've heard or adopted is necessarily the gospel or the truth.
Yeah. So when we come to definitions, so I like people like say, well, define what is sex mean, male and female. And that's actually not
Yeah.
simple because it depends on which questions
Right.
you're asking. I like to use what are called 3G sex categories. And these are categories that people who study human biology use, who study sex and sexuality. And that is, there are typical patterns. They're not the only patterns, but they're typical patterns of biological variation that we see in humans. One typical pattern would be a 3G female. And that means a collection of genes, genitals, and gonads that sort of cluster together, right? So a 3G female, for example, has two X chromosomes and a variety of genes there, has a particular set of genitals, right? Generally, a vagina, labia, and clitoris, and has ovaries as their gonads, right? So that's typical. Now, a typical 3G male, right, has testes for the gonads, a penis and scrotum for the genitals, and XY for the chromosomes. That is the common distribution of those patterns. But there are plenty, tens, if not hundreds of millions of people wandering on the planet right now that don't quite fit into those 3G categories because their variation's a little different. And so all I'm saying with understanding sex as a spectrum as opposed to a binary is that there's not two kinds, like male and female are not two different kinds of thing. What we usually call male and female are typical clusters of the distribution of different kinds of biology, right? And then once we understand that, we know that some people don't fit into these typical clusters. Doesn't make them not human or not male or female or not right or what have you. It's just we need to understand that these things exist on a spectrum, not as two different kinds. Men are not from Mars. Women are not from Venus. We're both the same species from the same planet. Our bodies are a lot more similar than they are different. And there's a lot of bodies that don't fit cleanly into those two categories.
And we are so trained, I suppose perhaps a bit brainwashed, to see things just as a binary. And so the spectrum approach is really beautiful. It leaves a lot of space.
Yeah, and it does. And I think it's really important because I'm not saying there's just some even distribution of everything and there's no differences. I'm not saying there aren't clusters. I'm not saying that it's like a line between like really female and really male. No. It's varied. Like some things are really patterned in different ways, like having a uterus or not. Other things, like your liver or your kidneys, right, or a lot of your ligamentary and other fat structures are not patterned in such different ways. And so knowing what these patterns are helps us understand why, for example, someone might look at their body and be like, well, my body doesn't look like what I'm supposed to look like for my gender or my sex or whatever. Or my body doesn't feel right to me in regards to gender or sex or something like that. And, welcome to the club. That's what it means to be human. There's a huge variation, and we do harm to people by assuming there's only one way to be male, one way to be female, one way to be a man.
And we see now that harm can really exacerbate into so many cultural problems too. So it's many things have come out of this.
Absolutely.
You use animals a lot to show how our roles also, and we'll talk about the biology too, but our roles can change based on evolution and need. I think you talk about several. Can you give us an example of maybe an animal species where it doesn't look like our little nuclear environment that we think we should have?
Yeah. So, I think this is really important. So to set the stage, right? The reason there are people who say that, no, humans evolved one way. All the world, everything is biology one way. Females are this way, males are this way. And that's just the way it is for everything. So I'm like, well, let's talk about seahorses, right? So the male seahorse, right, gets together with a female seahorse. They exude sort of some sperm and eggs into the water. They both throw them out there. They get together. The male takes them all into his pouch, right, and then gestates them and holds them around till they grow up and then gives birth to them. That's a little bit different from our standard expectation. Or something like the spotted hyena, Crocuta crocuta. It's a great species, genus and species name. The spotted hyena.
Say that again. That was exciting for me.
Crocuta crocuta.
Oh my God, that should be
So
the name of a Disney book.
well, speaking of Disney, everyone
Occlude.
has like the Disney hyenas, and the Lion King are a horrible version of hyenas. Hyenas are smart. They're incredibly highly social animals. They're run by these matriarchies where these dominant females sort of guide the group and the clan to do things. Anyway, what's fascinating about the female hyenas is that they're typical sort of their hormones and their more, physiology is very typical female mammal, except female hyenas are bigger than male hyenas, which is not uncommon in mammals, but female hyenas are bigger than male hyenas. And if you look at them, female hyenas have what's called a phallus, right, which looks like a penis, but it's a phallus and a scrotum. What is evolved in female hyenas is their clitoris and labia have evolved into what to look like a penis, a large phallus and a scrotum. And through that, they urinate and give birth, all those kinds of things. So it's really absolutely fantastic and amazing. And in their social relations to one another, like the high-ranking females their phallus will get erect and they'll put it in the face of the males to be dominant over them. Again, slightly different from the way we think about male and female roles. That
Cool.
I could go on. And like, there's lots of fish. There's lots of fish that are born, they mature, their bodies mature into production of, let's say, a large gamete, like an egg, right? But then as their body grows, if they become the biggest fish in their little group, their body changes. The same DNA, same body changes and starts to have the reproductive anatomy that produces sperm. But then sometimes if another bigger fish comes in, they change back into the female form again. So variation is the name of the game in biology, with typical patterns. I'm not saying there's not patterns or anything like that, but it's just really interesting to point out. Now, humans are very distinctive, right? In our sex biology, we don't flip back and forth internally in the same body all the time, but we are much more variable than most people think.
I love that. And are there variations, like you made a good point saying we don't necessarily flip like that, but are there variations that we see in humans currently culturally, or you have a thing about humans now and then? You talk a lot about how that has sort of is important. Maybe that's part of that conversation of how we're different.
Yeah, so I think this is really important, right? So humans are incredibly biocultural, more so than any other. That means everything we do is a complex entanglement, right? Tangling, interweaving together of our biology and our culture and our history and our perceptions, all that kind of stuff, right? Nothing is just there. Let me just give you very simple examples for the listeners here. Think of your foot. Everyone just think of your foot, and then you can even take your shoes and socks off and have a look if you want. But if you think of your foot and then look down at that, for most of the listeners here, look at your pinky toe. Have you ever wondered what's up with the pinky toe? Why is it all scrunched under? That doesn't make any sense, right? It's all like weird shaped. And that pinky toe is that way because your entire life you've been wearing shoes. If you had not worn shoes, the human foot looks very different. It's spread out. The ligaments are different. The muscles are different. The bones develop differently. It looks like a different thing. So that's a simple example, but everything we do is like the pinky toe. That is, everything of our body and everything of our culture are mutually interactive. Okay, that was a really long lead up to this. But when I say humans then, I'm talking about over the last couple million years, because, our genus Homo is 2.5 million years old, but humans like us have been around for 300,000 or 400,000 years. And what we can do is look into the past and look at bodies, and we can look at sort of what they left, their materials, called archaeology, right? And what we can demonstrate is that contemporary gender roles, the ways of we think of what it is to be a man or a woman and how they relate, we don't see them in the past in the same way. We do see some differences between bodies, right? Clearly. And there's clearly some kind of behavioral or cultural distinctions probably related to reproductive biology, but they're not the same as we see now. We see in the archaeological record in the last 4,000 or 5,000, 6,000 years, clear evidence of a difference between men and women in society in the way we do now, different foods, different behavior patterns, things like that. So one thing that's really important to know is that, and then if you look across all living humans today, or even the last few hundred years, you'll see that there's some patterns in gender, but there's a lot of variation. Like many societies don't just have two genders, they have three or more. Other societies, something that's considered masculine in one society will be more feminine in another society. So the deep past, the recent past, and today illustrates that there's not just one way to do gender, and there's not just one way to sort of think of and represent bodies. And so I think it's really important to recognize that, because our society, let's take the United States right now, people are told, this is how you're a man, this is how you're a woman. And they're really restrictive. And I think that does harm. I think that messes with people, because all of us, if you just think of 20 people and imagine them in your head, you will see not all of them fit the expected what bodies should look like. Not all of them fit
Wow.
behaviorally how, they should map to gender. I mean, we have a lot of variation. We all know it, and yet we constantly deny it.
And even I think of small things like we often think of women when it comes to body image stuff, but with boys,
Oh, yeah.
Someone will say, "Oh, look, you're getting so tall," and there's a sense in that the male, the masculine male, is supposed to be tall when most men aren't tall, and so it's in our language, isn't it? How harmful!
And a lot of women are taller than men, and we in our society are like, "Oh no, that's bad." Like, what? This is a normal distribution of human bodies and biology. Why is it negative that a man is not tall? There's no biological this is a complete culturally and really absurd and non-reflective of reality assertion. And so that's why in a large sense I wrote this book. We know a lot about human variation. We know a lot about sex and biology in the animal kingdom. We know a lot about evolution. If we're going to have this conversation about identity, about bodies, about what sex is, about what gender is, we got to start somewhere. We have to have some common understanding. You can't just bring random opinions to the table. You can't just go ask Grok or AI to tell you what's going on, because it'll lie to you. It'll be wrong. Everyone needs their own understanding so that they're not afraid to talk about this. If we don't talk about it, we lose.
Right. And we're passing down anecdotes and old tales, and we're not really questioning the science. And I think we do this as a culture a lot. We tell each other the same thing over and over. And then to your point, we stop and go, wait, what is the science?
Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's not right.
The term boys will be boys. Really? What is that?
What does that mean?
What does that mean, right? Like boys are going to run around and torture insects? I was recently just writing a little piece on that where, there's these two boys torturing these insects, killing insects. I'm like, oh, boys will be boys. I'm like, well, first of all, that's not true, right? There's huge variation in what it means to be a boy. And there's many, many boys. I would not have run around killing insects. I'm a boy. I was a boy. I'm a man. I mean, so there's these really interesting things that we constrain the range of possibilities with the assumptions you're talking about, right?
We do. And it is limiting. I remember being in high school, I grew up with all boys. And I wanted to take power mechanics. And I remember they were like, girls don't take power mechanics. Why would you take that? I was like, because I want to. I'm like, well, okay. Like, it was unheard of that I would want to take a male course in school.
Which is insane because there's no such thing as a male or female brain biologically. Those things don't exist. You can put all this stuff on the table. Now, the way brains interpret the world and function the way we interpret the world is shaped by how we grow up and all that. But there is and people make this mistake all the time. And even some scientists are like, well, there are male brains and female brains. Male brains are better at this. Female brains are better than that. Not true. There's way more individual variation between brains. But how do we reinforce this? Why do we think there's brain differences? You just gave the exact example because for girls who want to take math classes, people are like, oh, you're no good at math. And you know what? You say that enough, you societally believe that.
The brain believes it.
And it becomes real. Yeah. We're biocultural, right? Biocultural. That's the way it works, right? But if you were to provide everyone equal opportunity for different kinds of things, you would still see some differences. Like, I'm not saying there's going to be starting centers in professional American football that are female, right? You really have to be over 300 pound, a particular kind of muscles. But
there's some science there.
Right. And so that's fine. There's some important differences. But you're going to see a lot more engineers, mathematicians, and say chemists that are female than there are currently today, because the only reason that's not the case is because we assume and mandate that little girls don't have the smarts or the capacity to do these kinds of things. And that is biologically incorrect.
And boys shouldn't have things that are pink or Barbies or
colors. Like the pink thing was invented recently. Like the pink blue is and yet what's amazing to show how brains work, you show someone pink or you show someone blue and then ask them some questions. They will be influenced by the color you just showed them. And it's
because our brains are so malleable, right? Like the cultural piece is huge. What we receive is, and we do that here in mental health all the time. What you receive as a young person frames your brain.
Exactly.
And it's a lot of work to change it.
Frames your eyes, frames your ears, all of that. And so that's why I'm really like in this book, I spend this, like one of the hardest chapters is this chapter, Humans Now, where I'm just like, okay, everyone says males and females are different, men and women are different. Let's look at the biology. Let's look at every piece of our body where there's variation. And I say variation as opposed to difference because most of it's variation. Muscles, bones, skin, hormones, That's all variation, not difference, right? That is,
Yeah.
we all have testosterone, we all have estrogen, we all have progesterone, right? All those kinds of things, but they're different levels. We all have bones and muscles and skin made of the same stuff, but they vary a little bit. And again, I'm rambling here, but I think it's really
No, you're not. It's beautiful.
It's really important because if we take the variation approach as opposed to the two kinds of human approach, we're better able to understand why different bodies are in different ways, what our questions are about health, both physical and mental. And we also open the door to better research and better understanding of what human capacities and potentials are.
Yes. And I love the focus in the book, and you're mentioning a lot of it here on the recent, because so much of this is a product of a current world, not the entire existence of humans, as you mentioned earlier. Again, we find this is a link we find in mental health often, as our views on body and morality and food are like 100 years old, and we're all buying into them. So I love that the book does a lot with that. I think it's really important to question that sort of how it's gone over time. Question. This one bothers me. I don't know if you're going to have the answer. And I've always used this as my argument of why we are not these linear, black and white humans. Men have nipples. What is that about?
So men don't have the milk producing glandular organs, right? So that's actually a big difference. Not all women do either. So here's the difference so mammary tissue is really interesting. All humans have mammary tissue, right? That is the fatty tissue up here around the chest. 30 to 60% of those who are classified as male or men, right, actually develop what we would call breasts, the sort of fatty tissue in there. That's actually a typical part. Those who are female undergo puberty, right, sort of XX, and undergo all those associated hormones, usually develop more fatty tissue in that area, but they do something else. If all the sort of genes come together and development works, and this is for most females, but not all, you actually develop these milk-producing glandular ducts that at a certain time, if you become pregnant, right, then there's some shift to hormone and a few other special things that turn those ducts on so you can produce milk. There's a couple examples where you can induce pseudo-lactation in males. You can actually get them to produce.
Because they have a nipple, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We all have a nipple. Everything is there except for the ducts. Well, they have the nipple. So there's a great movie called Time Bad. It's a long time ago by the same people who made Monty Python and others.
Wait, I remember this movie vaguely.
And so one of my favorite lines is there's this evil, demon sort of thing, and he's criticizing God, and he's like, "What a ridiculous thing! I mean, come on, nipples for men." And the whole,
so I'm not the first to be like, "Why do you have a nipple?"
But the whole point is, the question is, why do we have nipples? Because we're mammals. All mammals have nipples. That's the body plan. The weird thing about humans is we only have one set of nipples. We only have two. Usually, you can get sometimes extra nipples, but
you don't use them.
Well,
men don't use them. What do you think?
They're part of the body plan. We're the same species. We are not two different kinds of thing. And so I think that's it. And the nipple, but the nipple is a great thing, is because what we are tweaks on a body plan, right? Male and female. It's the same body with some variation. So for example, we all have nipples. We all have livers. We all have hearts. We all have spleens. Yeah. We all have kidneys and pancreases, right? None of those things are male and female. Like nipples are not female, nipples not male.
Okay.
Glandular ducts that filter blood and put a bunch of sugar and fat into it and shove it out the nipple. That's something that only certain bodies have.
The 3G female, if we call it that.
Yes, but even not all, actually not even all 3G females, because there's not a lot, but it's not uncommon for many women who do get pregnant and give birth to have real trouble with the glandular development. And so some women don't lactate or can only lactate out of one breast, or there's a variety of different kinds of things, which doesn't make them any less woman or any less female in any way, shape, or form. No. It's about variation. Exactly.
Now, you have ruined something for me, though, because I was hoping our conversation would have me convinced that men could eventually nurse our children and have them experience that.
There are only two species of mammal where males regularly lactate and feed infants, and they're both fruit bats. So there are two species of fruit bats where males and females just hang around and they lactate on their fur and the little, out the nipples on the fur, and little babies they're super cute. It's amazingly cute.
I love fruit bats, by the way.
Yeah,
I love them more.
Yeah. But no, so you can, by giving external progesterone, you can drive some pseudolactation in folks who don't have the glands, but no. But everything else. But the thing is, people are terrified of man boobs, right? There's this whole industry of trying to tell guys, 30
The
to
man
60.
bro.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. 30 to
I couldn't help it.
60% of those who are, who would identify as male will develop some mammary tissue. And that's part
Yeah.
of being human. Yet culturally, we're
Biologically
like,
okay.
oh no, right? But that's also, we're weird. The United States, a lot of Western cultures, the United States in particular, because we have, unlike many cultures, the idea of the breast as a sexual thing actually is not super common around the world. And
They
yeah,
talk about it.
yeah,
They look at it.
yeah.
Yeah. We're so caught up in America. I always say we're afraid of anything that ends in ATE.
Yeah.
So anything where we copulate, urinate, defecate, masturbate, masticate, like pretty much anything, we do not talk about it here on this side of the Atlantic and Pacific.
Yeah. Well, we have this really weird thing about bathrooms. Well, we call them bathrooms, but we're just talking about places where you defecate or urinate or clean. We're like,
God
oh
forbid.
no, and that's so weird because a lot of the world, it's like, go over there and do your stuff. I mean, yeah.
We all do it.
Yeah.
It's funny. Or what do they call it when you're scared to pee if someone's next to you? Because someone might hear you pee, even though we all must pee and defecate to live.
Right.
We cannot be human, right? I mean, you're the scientist, but I'm pretty sure that's true. What about DNA? You have a chapter in the book on the brain and DNA. You talked a little bit about it. And I know over time, I suppose DNA can change from all these things you've mentioned, but is there anything to learn about in that as well?
There's a lot to learn, especially if you think about the recent World Athletics decision and the Olympic Committee decision to sort of do this sex testing again, and they're associating certain of that with particular genes. So clearly DNA matters, right? DNA is really important. It's not the end all be all of everything, but it is a sort of very important storage of information that is needed for the organism to develop. So a big important difference in DNA and the variation in humans is in the 23rd chromosome, whether you have two X's or an X and a Y. Now, let me just be very, very clear. There are many, many people that have three X's or one X or an X and two Ys or an X and three. So there's variation there. But let's just stay with the typical distribution of variation, XX or XY. In those cases, you have a few different genes going on, right, on average. So if you have a Y chromosome, you have SRY and a few other genes that turn on, usually, during development that push the body in certain ways. If you don't have a Y chromosome, you have two X chromosomes, you have a variety of other genes that turn on at a certain point in development, about 8 to 10 weeks, and push the development of certain things about gonads and stuff in different ways. So the DNA is really important because it pushes or nudges, depending on which DNA you have, and whether it turns on or not, or whether it functions the way it's supposed to. All of those things. So, then you get some of these different patterns of reproductive biology and development. But note, I kept hedging and saying, if it does this, if it does that. So you can be XY and not have testes, right? Or a penis. That's rare, but it's not that totally absent.
Possible.
And you could also be XX or XY and have extra set of gonads or have the opposite set of gonads. So you're not actually 3G. The bottom line here, what I'm just trying to get across with the book is that they're typical clusters, but there's a lot of variation. And so we shouldn't be seeing that variation as weird or problematic or not human.
Good.
We should understand that there's a lot of successful ways to be human, and our bodies demonstrate that with their variation.
And if this is what happens, then we have a different tolerance and a different acceptance than is at least probably generally accepted right now out there.
Well, and also, I mean, just to be very explicit, in the current political climate, I mean, there's a number of folks who don't fit into these typical clusters, whether in gender or in parts of their bodies, or just, in general, are trying to search to figure out where they fit in society and things like that. That are just being attacked and that are at great risk because we have very powerful people saying, no, there's only one way to be human. And if you're not that way, you're not human. You're not legal. That is terrifying because that is stuff of like sci-fi horrible novels. And yet it's happening right now.
Arthur C. Clarke wrote about such things, right? Or Isaac Asimov. I'm like, whoa. Yeah. And it can be okay, is what you're saying. So it makes sense biologically. It makes sense over the history of all species.
Right.
It's in the animal kingdom. Why can't we be okay with it?
Yeah. And I think what is really important here is to understand that I'm not saying that male and female aren't things, that men and women aren't things, that there's not these clusters that isn't relevant, that it doesn't matter what reproductive biology variation you have. All of those things matter, but they're a mix of culture and biology and variation. It's not like there's two kinds of human, a man and a woman or a male and a female. And I think once we get away from this binary thinking, there's two distinct kinds of things, then we're better. Let me just reinforce that. The binary
Please.
is, most people don't know what it means, right? We think binarily all the time. So a binary is a 1 and a 0, right? So we think about it that way, right? That's like how we use binary code. That's how our coding system works. A 1 and a 0 are both the same category, right? They're both numbers. So 1 and a 0 are both numbers, but they have nothing to do with one another. There is no overlap between a 1 and a 0. They're two different kinds of things in the category number. That is not at all what humans are, right? You can say that a man and a woman or a male and a female are two distinct kinds of things with no overlap. Almost everything about our bodies overlaps, usually completely, or is part of the same variation distribution. Again, nipples, right? I mean, we all have nipples, right? That's not a 1 and a 0. Like only one of them could have nipples, otherwise they wouldn't be a 1 and a 0. And I think it's just really important to point that out, because once we get rid of the binary thinking, we're then faced with complexity and understanding typical clusters and variation inside and between those clusters. And our questions get more scientifically informed, but also I think we're doing something, talking in the broader mental health frame. We're also acknowledging what everyone knows is there and is afraid to mention: variation. There are many ways to do the human thing right.
I love that. That's going to be the tagline right there. And don't we live in a spectrum now? We're willing to give people on the autism disorder spectrum. We're willing to let them be in a spectrum. We're willing to let ADHD be a spectrum. So I think our society is learning about spectrums. But here it gets a little dicey, right? We haven't adopted it, or at least let it come into this space.
Yeah. Well, I've got a lot of people recently have like said, I agree with you, Agustín, but don't use the term spectrum, because that scares people and everyone thinks it's just an even distribution and it's flat. And someone even sent me the color spectrum, the rainbow. And they're like, see, this is like, they think it's gay pride. And I'm like, wait, okay, the color spectrum is a good example in many ways. There are many typical clusters, but there's blue, right? And there's red, right? And there's yellow. We can identify those. What we don't think about is that like blue is blue, right? But blue and red are made of the same thing. It's light waves in different frequencies, different typical clusters, but they're not different kinds of thing. They just look different to us because of the way they're structured. That's what I'm talking about. So male and female bodies are all the same stuff, mixed around in different ways and different variation. And I think that's what I mean by spectrum. And so I think it's really important for us to think of that. And we have to be careful making it sound like ADHD and autism writ large. What we see there is a broad collection, right? I even think sometimes people think of a spectrum as a line, like with two different points and the stuff in between them. But that kind of thing is like male or female on a line, or normal and abnormal on a line. And spectrums aren't lines. They're this big distribution of stuff, all the same stuff with typical clusterings.
Clusters. Oh, I love you said that. That's what my brain's thinking. It's thinking of all these different areas, and none of them fit neatly. And they're all different variations, which variation is definitely one of the themes.
The height thing is great because we associate height as such an importance. Men are tall, women are shorter or smaller than men. But if you just select a random 100 people, 50% identify as male, 50% as female, and you line them up, they don't line 50-50. There's a lot of, it's about 70% overlap. The same is for body weight, right? Body size and structure. Yes, the larger half is going to have more men in it, and the smaller half is going to have more women in it. But there's going to be a lot of overlap. And if we just accept that's the way it is as a starting point, rather than, well, we know men are supposed to be bigger than women, we're having a different conversation.
We sure are. Even those little pieces you're pulling out are huge. That alone changes our perspective and how we look at it. And I think you do a great job in the book of doing this. You keep male and female in a place that makes sense, but you also allow us to look beyond that into a larger scope. And kudos for that, because that's a hard thing to do in a book. And I never felt like you were leaning so deep that it was offensive. It was so scientific and so helpful to read.
Yeah, I mean, and that's one of the challenges, right? There's so much knowledge and information. I'm like, how do I don't make the book too long. How do I get it very accurately in there, but yet make it in a way that's accessible? So I tried to write it in a way that, some parts are dry, but I tried to get it in that way. But also, remember, it's about 150 pages of text and then like 50 pages of endnotes. So the point is,
when I was reading it, I go, we're done?
Yeah. If the book is short on purpose because I want people to actually read it. But if you want to dive further and go do your own research and follow stuff up, there are hundreds of citations and references in there for you to follow. And I think that's really important because What I wanted to do
Agreed.
is to write something accessible, but also to provide the science if people want to take that next step.
I love it because we need people to build this conversation.
Yeah.
You have opened up a beautiful opportunity. Are there pundits? Are there people even in your own world that are like, oh, this is a bad idea. Don't do this. This is controversial. Any challenges with having this kind of topic out there?
Absolutely. There's so many people
Of
who
course you do.
hate this, right? And I guess, I mean, just, just on X the other day, there's just people screaming at me saying these horrible things. I get hate mail. I get all these kinds of things
Oh,
nonstop
my goodness.
because there's a small cluster, and this isn't the majority of people. There's a small cluster that have a very strong political framing of hate and
Yeah.
cruelty. And they take all of this beautiful variation, all this stuff, ignore all of that. And what they want to do is target trans individuals, intersex individuals, or anyone that doesn't fit within their thing. And they want to use biology to justify it. I'm like, no, 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 no. Look, if you
Can't use biology.
if you hate a certain category of human being, you need to be honest and just admit that, right? I don't agree with it, but do not use biology to fakely, right, to artificially justify, because biology does not justify a clean, absolute division of humans into two kinds. That's not the way it works. So I
Beautiful.
get attacked a lot, and like right now, people are like, well, you need to debate these, right wing, really angry, homophobic folks, and I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I don't. Right? I'm not
It's in the
interested in.
science.
I'm not interested in changing someone's mind. I'm interested in providing the information for a better conversation. And so rather than screaming at people who are never going to sort of be open to complexity, I would rather offer to the readers, offer to the world, offer to the public the opportunity to engage with stuff and see where it goes. I never ask people to agree with me. I just ask people to have a basic understanding of what we know about bodies. And then let's have the conversation.
Beautiful. Let the science, let the biology be there. And then you have, like you said, a basis. So eventually when people look at that, they go, oh,
yeah,
and it's there. And I appreciate this. It was a bold venture then in the world we live in for you to write this.
I didn't know how bold.
To your point.
When I started writing this, I mean, now, what is it like? I just did an interview for this big Spanish newspaper, El País, and they actually published an English version, which is really nice, as in addition to the Spanish version. But what is it? It's a strange thing as a scholar, as a teacher, as a scientist, to have spent years working on a book and to publish the book in a moment where a lot of what I say in that book is directly in opposition to official government doctrine. Right? That's a trip. So to publish a book about biology today is a political act, and that's sad.
It's sad. And yet important. I think of the people that have done what you've done throughout of history that have helped to put a language out there that people didn't have. And you're doing that. And you're also backing it up with science.
And I'm trying to do that in an effective way. I get critiqued by clusters of some scientists who are like, no, you're making everything too complicated. Let's just stick with sperm and egg. And like, why do we need all the rest of the stuff? But I say to them, well, we need the rest of the stuff because a man is not a sperm and a woman is not an egg. If your whole definitional focus is going to be based on what kind of gametes, the sperm or egg, you produce, you're missing an enormous chunk of what bodies and lives do. And so we either talk about what bodies and lives do in the big picture and include all the messy stuff, or stop pretending that you're talking about biology.
Yeah, stop using that is your argument, because
Yeah.
you're showing you can't do that. You can be who you want to be and say what you want to say, but you can't use my science.
Absolutely.
And I'm the scientist. I'm the person who studies this.
You can't misrepresent stuff to say this is the way the world is when the world is not that way. If you want to be hateful, if you want to be cruel, if you want to exclude humans from existence in a society, you gotta own that. I don't agree with it, but people have the right to say whatever the hell they want. But do not fake a backup by biology.
Why you wrote this? That's why we need it. Do we need other people to build this? What do you think science owes to get bigger and larger in this conversation?
I mean, we need K through 12 education to go back to. The U.S. used to have amazing K through 12 education. We don't anymore, unfortunately. And we need to go back to, for example, teaching good biology, including human biology, in K through 6. I mean, third, fourth, fifth graders, sixth graders, they are ready. They can learn so much. And if we give basic information about bodies, about the animal world, about ecology, those kinds of things, imagine if every kid got a great set of biology classes. Every kid got a great set of history classes. Every kid got a great set of government classes. They don't even teach government anymore in most schools. Like,
Right.
just to say, hey, here's the stuff we know about how the world works. Let's go from there. So I think that's one very important thing I would love to see. And there are a lot of great biologists and anthropologists and other scholars working with K through 12 systems and trying to get this kind of stuff in.
Right.
But, here in the US, it's
We need
getting
the
harder and
foundation.
harder. Yeah, we do need the
You
foundation.
said earlier. And the little people.
I shouldn't be, saying, I say stuff, and I'm teaching a big intro anthropology class. I present information and offer readings and stuff. And here 18, 19, 20-year-olds are like, huh? I've never heard this before in my life. And I'm like, oh my God, you've come from some of the best schools in this country and you've never heard this before? That's an indictment of us as a society.
So there's a huge broad stroke that can build from this. And it makes me think of what we're doing here with trying to reframe health education, because health class education is not based on science right now. It's based on anecdote and assumptions and teacher information, not to their fault. There's no, at least in Ohio, I'm speaking from Ohio, there is no rubric. So I'm all on that board. Let's start with our young people and give them science. What's a piece of advice for somebody who is journeying on explaining or understanding a binary, non-binary? Is there just a quick quip that would help them?
Yeah, I think don't feel wrong or bad if you don't fit into a clear binary, or if someone is trying to explain to you how they don't fit, or even like pronouns or whatever, listen. Right. So a lot of people come and ask me like, well, what do this person has a different identity. I don't understand it. What's going on? So the first thing we need to do is listen. Like if someone says, hey, I don't feel right in this body, or hey, I'm really confused about these things, please start by listening to them first. And then, I don't need to tell you this. This is, this is why you're here, right? This is this important thing. But I'm afraid our society's gotten to the point of people start by yelling or denying rather than listening. And so I think these discussions need to start by listening. But another thing I think that's really, really important is people need to try, and it's really hard now, but to try to educate themselves or to get access to this baseline information. So I wrote this book. I'm not kidding myself. It's not going to be a giant bestseller. Not everyone's going to read it, even though I wish they would. But there's lots of places to get good information. Don't use ChatGPT or Grok or something to tell you the way the world is. Those things do not do the job most people think they do. Do the work, figure it out, and listen to people.
Again, it's that listen and be curious. Maybe we can learn instead of judge.
Yeah.
Also, I'll put in all the show notes access, but is there a website for the book, or do they just go to Amazon to find it? What's a good way to get this book?
Princeton University Press sells it. You can buy it from them. You can get it from Amazon. But what I would like to encourage everyone to do is, if you live in a city or a town with a local bookstore, this book is on sale in almost every local bookstore, small bookstore, independent bookstore in the United States. And if they don't have it on their shelves, they can order it for you in a day or two. Please support local bookstores, because that's one of the magic opportunities that we have in this country. Is there's still lots of local bookstores, lots of good things to read, and they're just cool places to go hang out.
My gosh, aren't you right? They always have like the little coffee nooks and the cute little child. I was just in one the other day, and maybe I'll put, you know what, you've inspired me. When I put this out, I'm going to put a list of some of our really good local coffee shops here and bookstores that are sometimes in a marriage, which I love that marriage personally.
Yeah, I do too. I'm a giant fan. I gave a talk in a really cool bookstore in Providence, Symposium Books, and they just had this really cool little sitting area, and we were having a conversation, and people would come in and out of the bookstore and come in and sit down, and it was just a cozy place, have some coffee. It was really nice. And there's what is the name of the bookstore there on what is the name of that road?
Is it like by you where you guys used to live?
Yeah,
right there.
Where David loved that area.
In Cleveland Heights?
No, it's not Cleveland Heights. It's where that used to be all the cool stores and
Coventry?
Coventry, yes.
Max. It was Max.
Yes, Max.
I wonder if it's still there.
Max Books.
Oh, I hope so.
I think so. Yeah, Max Books. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Max Books. We're going to get a list out, because I love that you brought that in, because let's support the grassroots, the local. I love it. I was out with girls last night. I said, we're going to a local place. Sorry. I'll like, if I'm going to spend my money, and this is a whole nother rant, but you know what? It's a great way to read your book and also to support. And I love it. So I will put all the access so people can find it. Finally, is there a word that describes this journey with this book?
How about a couple words? Something I frequently sign is, I'll give you a sentence in a couple words. Being human is always difficult, but it's often amazing. And so I'm going to actually say amazing is my favorite word about humans. But that's going to be followed by difficult because, those two
Yeah.
things go together.
And we're not in a binary, right? So we
Yep.
have to have lots of different
Yep.
clusters of
Yep.
ideas. So
Yep.
difficult and amazing. And still difficult. And I regret that you have to deal with some of that. We don't make change without friction. There's no
Exactly.
comfort and courage, Brene Brown. So you might suffer a bit for this, for the benefit, the bigger benefit. And I appreciate you doing that.
I'm not. So many more people are suffering because of the misinformation, the cruelty, and the actual hate out there. And so anything any of us can do to reduce other people's suffering and to increase awareness and reduce cruelty is a good thing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if that's the biggest message someone takes away, that makes change right there. So I love it. You're a busy person. I think you said you were interviewing in Malaysia this morning. You're all over, you're international, and you took time out for this conversation with me. And I loved it for my own personal reasons. And I love that we can share it with whoever's listening and keep bringing this story larger and broader.
So thanks so much for having me. It's always a great conversation with you.
Always love it. Thanks for listening to the Mental Health Spotlight Podcast, helping you hold hope on your recovery path.